Nora Speaks is a weekly podcast that tugs at the soul and consciousness of the Black community. With show topics such as youth empowerment, education, women's impact, and civic engagement, Nora Speaks challenges the listener to not only join the movement, but be the movement. On the show, you'll learn from insightful guests who have demonstrated capacity in these fields and more, and I'm your host, Nora Muhammad. Welcome to the show. Welcome to episode 195, and I am your host, Nora Muhammad. I'm so grateful to be back with you for another episode of the Nora Speaks podcast. And if you enjoy this podcast, I encourage you to like the podcast on social media. You can follow me at Nora Speaks Podcast on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. And I also encourage you to become a subscriber and let your friends and your family know about the Nora Speaks podcast if you find that this podcast has value to you. In this episode of the podcast, I have titled this one, The Lost Art of Listening. And the reason why I gave it that title is that we have such an outputting culture, meaning that everyone is talking, everyone is saying something, and we don't take the time, I don't think, in this culture to listen as much as we talk. And you may say, well, no, I'm listening to you right now. I'm listening to you on the podcast, and I'm grateful for that. And generally, if someone is a consumer of podcasts or a subscriber to podcast, and there's all kinds of podcasts. There's podcasts on finance and money. There's podcasts on history. There's entertainment podcasts where there's fictional stories. There's podcasts on true crime. There's podcasts on culture. If someone's a listener to the podcast, or like me, I may consume NPR during my day. I'm not talking necessarily about you, although this may be relevant to you as well. I just find that in our popular culture, in our modern culture, I should say, a lot of folks are talking and we are not listening, I think, as much as we should. And so your question or your comment to me would be, well, here you are talking and I say, yes, I am talking. And I think that you should be questioning me like we question others, or we should question others. And that is what's qualifying you to speak, right? So in general, I think that we should all listen more than we speak. We've all heard people say, well, you have 2 ears and 1 mouth. We should be listening twice as much as we're talking. And I think that is so important. I think that we should remind our young people, to just listen, be an observer. Not that they should not talk. And it's not that they don't have anything to say. However, the least experienced may be the one that it's natural to hear from the least, whereas those who are more experienced are the ones that you would hear from, right? That's in an apprenticeship program, right? Whether you want to be a carpenter, an electrician, or a plumber, the student is not the one speaking all of the time. It's the one who has the experience, who's training the student, who's training the apprentice. And we have social media, we have podcasts, we have blogging, and this has given everyone a platform to speak. But the question is, what is qualifier? What's the qualifier that justifies us to listen, or to read, or to consume that person's material? And I've said before on the podcast that I live by the axiom to always study the author before opening the book. Get to know the author, get to know the speaker. If you're going to a function and there's going to be speakers or workshops, do a bit of research and digging and find out what's justifying your listening to that person. And that's important because there are folks who purport themselves to be experts or to be leaders, and they have no evidence, they have no foundation that they've built. They have no independent platform. Their only platform is social media. Their only platform is their blog. And I would suggest that a podcast, a blog, social media, that should be enhancing or bearing witness to the platform that somebody already has. And I'm someone who has certainly built a platform for myself doing work locally in my community. And I take the message that I share locally and I use the podcast as an opportunity to share positive messages and insightful messages abroad. But that's not because I came out the box talking. I came out the box doing a lot of listening to people who have much more experience than I did. Now, just because, we may attain positions like supervisor, boss, manager, teacher, or even parent, that doesn't mean that we don't listen. And in fact, we too must listen. If you're a supervisor, a manager, a boss, then you and I need to listen to our team. We need to listen to their concerns. We need to listen to their ideas. How else can we manage, supervise, guide, and lead if we don't know the biggest concerns of those who we're supposed to be supervising, guiding, managing, and leading? So we have to know what's going on. So we must listen. We must listen. Same thing with the teacher. Certainly the teacher gives the instruction, assigns work, but the teacher must also listen to ascertain whether students are comprehending, whether students have understanding. We can't just talk and talk and talk, or teach and teach and teach, and not provide an opportunity to those that we're talking to or teaching to find out exactly where they are. And then also we have to listen again to understand if we were actually understood by those we're talking to, whether you're a supervisor, whether you're a teacher, and especially if you're a parent. I know that in raising my sons, my family, every opportunity I got to share wisdom with them, I took it. And usually I had them in the car with me, taking them to school or wherever we were going. When you're in the car with your child, you essentially have a captive audience. And, my children weren't raised in the time where they constantly, had headphones on or earbuds in. It was an opportunity to talk. It was an opportunity to share so that they could have something to reflect on once they got older. However, we must also listen. I remember my son, I picked him up from child care, and he was after school care, and he must have been in kindergarten, maybe first grade, but I think kindergarten. And he tells me that Madison and Jake broke up. I'm like, wait, who's Madison? Who's Jake? And how old are they? We have to listen to get an idea of what's going on as parents. We have to listen. We have to share information. And then we have to shut our mouths and listen and be in tune to what's happening. And if we're not listening, we're not going to be in tune. And whatever stage of life, whatever platform we're operating in, if we don't listen, then we can definitely miss an opportunity for ourselves or for others. And even with the Nora Speaks podcast, I take the opportunity to listen to feedback, to read your emails, your questions, or comments on social media. I want the feedback. I need to make sure that this podcast is having the intended impact, the intended result, or otherwise, if I am not willing to listen, then this is just an exercise in ego. And who needs that? Who needs an exercise in ego when the lives and realities of our people are at stake? And this isn't the way that I would be exercising ego. So, share this with your young people. Make sure they get into the habit of listening, tuning their ears to what's being said, being consumers of the wisdom of those who are older or more experienced, so that when it's their time to stand up and say a word or two, when it's their time to stand up in leadership, when it's their time to parent, then they have something to give because they consume the wisdom of those who came before them. So it's so important, listening. And good supervisors listen. Strong parents listen. Great teachers listen. You have to be able to assess that what you are trying to get across has been effectively communicated. And then we also need to know what people need. And we are not going to know that if we are not listening. Have you ever had a conversation with someone and you can tell that even though they're not talking, they're kind of looking at you like they're listening, but you know they're just waiting for the break so that they can respond, right? And then once they say what is they're going to say, you think, did you hear anything that I said? Because you can see it. So maybe, listening takes a bit of humble mindset. And so maybe we should humble ourselves. Everyone has something to teach us, whether it's the four-year-old or the 40-year-old, everyone has a contribution. And however, to qualify ourselves to be the speaker in the room, then it takes a great deal of listening. And then just the last thing I'll say, I can recall being in classrooms or conferences or meeting rooms, and you see the person who's brand new to the room and they want to stand up and speak and talk about what they think things should be or could be or must be. And you think, man, you just got here. You don't have any foundation in this industry, in this work, in this field. You don't know the culture here. And here you are jumping the gun instead of being a sponge and absorbing. And maybe your contribution is meaningful, but listen to make sure that you're on target. We must listen to make sure that we are on target. So let's remember that we must listen. We should humble ourselves. I know sometimes we're excited about what we think. Well, guess what? Others are too, excited about what they think. And if we're going to have a fair exchange, and make others comfortable with us, then we have to listen. As a supervisor, when it's time for you to evaluate your employees and give them their quarterly assessments, well, you should also listen and identify or ask them to identify for you if they if they think that they're getting from you what they need to be successful. Because maybe you're not being a good leader because you're not listening to the needs of your team. And maybe they could be more successful if they got more from you that which they need. So there's so many benefits to just being a good listener. I want to thank you for listening to this episode of the Nora Speaks podcast. Until next time, stay in peace. The lack of knowledge of self is one of our main handicaps. It blocks us throughout the world. If you were the world and you were a part of the world, you would also turn a man down if he did not know who he actually was. If we, the so-called Negroes, do not know our own selves, how can we be accepted by a people who have a knowledge of self? Food for thought with the Honorable Elijah Muhammad. Thank you for listening to another episode of the Nora Speaks podcast. Be on the lookout for a new episode coming at you fresh next week. And as always, if you want to learn more about me and the work that I do, visit my website, norahmuhammad.com. Or if you have a listener question, email me at info@norahspeaks.com. You can also follow the Nora Speaks podcast on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter at Nora Speaks Podcast. I'll be sure to include links in the show notes. If this show has value to you, please subscribe, rate, and review, and share it with family and friends. And be sure to check out previous episodes. And remember, Don't just join the movement, be the movement. Stay in peace.